So John, hello.
Yes, let's
Thanks
do
so
this.
much for being here, for chatting with me. For those who kind of don't, already, for those who have not opened the internet in a few years, I'm just going to read your bio.
Sure.
So I don't know, you can, chew your fingernails or something.
Yeah.
John is the New York Times bestselling author of 5 books, including his most recent Do-Over, Rescue Monday, Reinvent Your Work and Never Get Stuck. For 18 years, he's helped some of the biggest brands in the world tell their story, including the Home Depot, Bose, Staples, and the Dave Ramsey team. Most recently, he's spoken to hundreds of thousands of people across the country at events for companies like Microsoft, Whirlpool, and Comedy Central. Featured regularly on national media, John has been seen on CNN, Fox News, Good Day LA, and many other key outlets. He's also written for Time, the Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Reader's Digest, and
This is such a
MSNBC.
long bio. Gosh.
I know, but it's so important to happen. In addition, John is also a big proponent of social media. The social media with blogs.
I
that
took
have
out
been-
expert. It used to say expert, but then I'm so tired of people saying they're internet gurus or like Periscope expert. No, you're not. It came out in March. Okay, go on.
His blogs have been read by 4 million people, and he's got more than 275,000 Twitter followers. In 2010, he used his influence with his tribe to build 2 kindergartens in Vietnam. That's my favorite country. And John lives with his awesome wife, Jenny, and their 2 awesome daughters in Franklin, Tennessee. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about kind of this idea of success. And I am curious. I don't know what you'll say to this. In the book Start, you talk a lot about the idea of being awesome, and
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that is like success or not. At one point, you say, you have this sort of quote that says, "I learned a simple lesson about being awesome. Always play to the size of your heart, not to the size of your audience. Awesome doesn't let the crowd determine the size of the performance. Awesome gets up for 2 people or 200. Awesome writes great books even if no one is going to read them. Awesome sweeps the parts of store floors that no foot will ever touch. Awesome can't help itself. Awesome has a huge heart, and that's what it will always play to. The size of the crowd doesn't matter. The applause of the audience doesn't matter." And I don't know, is awesome the same as success? Because if you're successful, aren't you having more than 2 people read your book?
Well, I mean, I think it was 2 weeks ago, spoke to 4 people. I was at a college and they said, "You're going to talk to students," and 4 showed up.
Wow.
So if I use that determination of crowd size is success, like what a failure. But if I go, you know what, I fulfilled, like I was there to do that. I gave everything I had to those 4 students. It was a Friday, so I get it. It's a Friday afternoon. Like you could have been like, the president of all books is coming, and it's a Friday in the spring, and I'm a college student. It's like I don't know a time when I was like, I got to go hear the speaker. And the event, like we did 2 other events that were a lot of fun. So I don't know. I always try to break the bubble of that so that people sometimes think, oh, you got a New York Times bestseller, or you have patterned shirts that are nice and crisp, and they think you must never have to speak to small rooms, and you're never done with that. I don't think. I think there's always, like when somebody that, I hate inspirational stuff on the internet that's empty, where it's like, work so hard you don't have to introduce yourself. What, to all 7 billion people? Like
Wow.
only the whole world has to know you? Like that's the stupidest thing. You'll always be unknown. You'll have your little niche thing, but so I guess for me, whether success and awesome are the same, I think I would define awesome as living out of who you really are with an ever increasing amount of your time and energy. And so that, okay, if this is who I am, like for me, awesome would be writing a book that has humor and honesty. Because Jenny, my wife, would sometimes read drafts and go, "Oh, it sounds like you're trying to be Jim Collins Jr."
Wow.
And she'd say, "You know who you suck at being? Jim Collins. Like he's awesome at Jim Collins. You're terrible." And she'd go, "And also, you're not a Stanford PhD researcher. I don't know if you knew that, John. You don't. That's not your pedigree." And she'd go, he's not hilarious. Like that's not
sure.
like that's not his bag. So be who you are. Like and it's the reverse is true as well, where I'll have speakers say, "Hey, should I be funny? Do I have to be funny on stage?" And I'll always go, "Are you funny at dinner tables?" If they say no, then I go, "Well, then maybe not." I don't think it feels awkward for you to learn one joke that isn't authentic. And you go, now to my main point, like you do this awkward transition because you read in a book about speeches. you're supposed to be funny. Like, so open up with a funny thing, and you're not funny, and it's so uncomfortable. So I think being like, it sounds like new agey, I guess, like be who you are. But the more I kind of spend time helping people figure out what they're trying to do, and the more I work on it in my own life, like being who what I feel like I was designed to be, like when I know I'm writing well and being that person, when it feels like running downhill, like it feels like running downhill, I know if I'm not careful, I'll create fake, empty stuff that might sound like everybody else's stuff. It might even sell well, but it's not me. And I always tell people, don't get successful at being somebody else, because then you have to be somebody else. And you've met people like that in your travels and your Twitterness. You've met people that you thought, oh, I wish I hadn't met them. Because the person they pretend to be is so kind and so nice, and the person they are backstage is the reverse of that, you know?
I think there's this other idea that makes me this idea, I love that phrase, don't get successful at being somebody else. I think it also reminds me of the way that it's really easy, sort of when you're on the edges of success or in, success or whatever it may be, to see people doing something that you don't actually want to do, but they are successful, and you're like, oh, like, if only. And then but that's not me, and I'd
hate it. Right. Jenny, there's circles I'm not part of anymore, that of popular people, and they'll have events and I don't get invited anymore. Yeah. And so I'll tell Jenny, like, oh man, I wish I was part of that. She'll go, no, you wouldn't. Yeah. Like you even if they had invited you, you wouldn't have gone. And I go, but it's nice to be invited. Yeah. I'm like a 7th grade adolescent who didn't get to go to the 8th grade dance. Mm-hmm. And so, I completely, or for me, it's running businesses. Like I just did a story the other day where a lot of people, at least I feel like in my circles, are comparing themselves to Gary Vee. Oh. So they're going like, Gary Vee's everywhere. This dude's blowing up. He's crushing Snapchat. His book launch was huge. And they always compare. And then they forget he has 650 employees. Like he's running a $100 million business. And so if you're a 27-year-old entrepreneur who has a book, why, like, you would never drive past a building with 6 floors that had 100 people on each floor and go, that building is killing me. Like, why am I not as good as that building right now? Mm-hmm. But the internet allows you that opportunity. And I wouldn't want to do that. Like, that gives me an ulcer saying that sentence. I never want 650 people's livelihood to be based on, like, the decision I'm making. That's not what I'm wired for. I'd much rather work with big companies that have that in place and help them really treat people well and have their employees happy than think I need to scale some company just because, like, people do that. Like, Gary Vee's a good Gary Vee. I'm good.
Right. Do you, when you think about sort of what you've achieved, do you think you're successful? That's a weird, awkward question, obviously, but do you think you're successful? And if so, is success just sort of a feeling, or is it more about, well, you have achieved, you're a New York Times bestselling author, and you are working for yourself. Is it those metrics? Is it those feelings? What is it?
I don't know. I would say I'm successful. Like, I feel successful in the sense of I left an established company and I'm going on 3 years of being able to work for myself. So I think anytime you're an entrepreneur and you're able to kind of keep the ship going, that's a degree of success, because it's not easy, like being an entrepreneur.
As you say, without like dancing on the streets for candy or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in that sense, and then I think about success in terms of my family. If my wife knows I love her and feels supported, and then I'm not a workaholic chasing something that's outside of this family, or if my kids know I love them and I'm engaged in their lives, and they'll definitely need therapy, but it's not like 20 years of therapy, it's like 4 years. And then like if I'm known, like if I have a group of people in Nashville that know me and can tell me the truth and can say like, hey, that thing you're doing, that's not normal. Like, my brother, for instance, Jenny told me I was a workaholic and that I needed a hobby. So I decided to play table tennis, because I call it that now that I'm serious. Mm-hmm. And so I looked up coaches on the Team USA site, found certified coaches, emailed them, started taking lessons from one of them. And my brother was like, how are you fixing being a workaholic by being a workaholic table tennis player? Like, that's whack. And like, he's like, why can't you just play at a bar and enjoy it? And I was like, that's a good question.
Wow.
And so success for me looks like a lot of things, but one of them is having people in my life that can go, dude, what are you? And then me having the place of heart to respond to that and not be like, how dare you? You're wrong. You don't know me, you know?
Yeah. I mean, so that's so interesting that you feel known and you use that phrase, because obviously when you first said that, I thought you were saying because people know you. Do you know what I mean? As if,
oh, well, like
because,
people in the streets.
Yeah. No. So it's so interesting, right? To feel known is a totally different idea.
Yeah. I think I've written about that before. Like, never confuse being famous with being known, because they're not the same thing. Like, that's like one of the loneliest existences of all is when everybody thinks they know you and nobody really does.
Right.
Like, they know the persona. I always relate it to, in the South, every fireworks store is the largest fireworks store in America. Like, that's what they all say. And so what happens is they build one that's a trailer. It's a small trailer, and then they build these huge wooden walls around it to make it look like a 4-story building. And so there's really nothing inside. Like, there's no 4-story fireworks store where, like, you take an escalator to Roman candles and you're like, oh, I'm on the 4th floor. But from the outside, it looks like a lot. So for me, fame can be like that. Being known is something completely different.
Okay, so who knows you? Who are these people? These are family? These are friends? Are these mentors? Are these coaches?
Yeah, so,
who are these people?
Jenny, my wife, knows me. A guy named Steven Brewster knows me. Like, every terrible part of me. Like, that dude knows my whole story and likes me anyway. Like, that's what I mean. A neighbor named Nate knows me. I left my job at a similar time he left his job, and we really kind of bonded and became friends during that experience. Who else knows me? My brother Will in town knows me. My brother Bennett knows me. And I've got a little sister, and she's 15 years younger, so she knows me from a family sense, but it's hard from a 40-year-old to a 25-year-old. Like, I don't call her up and go, hey, I'm working on this marriage issue. Like, I'd love to, because that would just, like, she would go like, I'm 25, like, I'm single. Like, I love you as my brother, but I can't give you advice on how to talk to your wife, you know?
Right.
And then I would say Reggie Joyner, who is with this group called Rethink, this nonprofit. He's another mentor. So I do believe, though, that, like, not everybody needs to know your whole story. I disagree with the idea of, like, you meet somebody and you vomit out, like, then when I was 12, then I was 18. Like, I had somebody ask me that once. They're like, do you think those people really know you because they don't know every part of your story? And Jenny was like, keep in mind, every day you live, the other chapters get smaller because you add new chapters. So I think you always need people that know. I think you always need people that know your whole story. Again, like Steven Brewster, I could call him tomorrow and go, dude, this thing is off the rails. I need some feedback. And I know he knows my whole story. But there's also mentors that, like, I'm working with a business coach, and I'm not going to do like a big confessional that I do with a counselor to my business coach, because he doesn't need to know that. He needs to know that I don't have a good strategy to increase my Facebook Live mentions and you know, like, so there's different grades of how I connect with people, I feel like.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, the way that sort of what spheres different people are in. I was talking to a coach recently who was telling me about working with someone who didn't understand the difference between, you know, therapy and coaching. And I've heard the same from mentors saying, you know, not understanding the difference between mentoring and coaching or whatever it may be. And so looking to the wrong people for the wrong things can be hard when you're trying to find
and it wrecks the relationship too. It puts a burden on the relationship that the relationship isn't designed to carry. Oh, and my counselor. I have a great counselor named Al Andrews, who, that guy knows like everything. And so, and there's been times in my life when I haven't had that, and it's super lonely, and I'll sprint in the wrong direction if I'm not careful. So I think I do this line. There's this line I put in Do-Over that said, leaders who can't be questioned end up doing questionable things. And that happens 100% of the time. And so if you show me a church or a business or a team that fell, I'll show you a leader who is isolated, who could only be told what they wanted to hear. And sometimes it happens because somebody takes advantage of the leader and they draw the wagons really close and go, I'm not getting hurt again. I'm not going to be vulnerable again. And then it's so tight. And you look up and go, how do you get to that spot? Like, it started here and you're off in this land. Like, how did it get there? It got there because nobody could say, hey, no, that's dangerous, or hey, this thing that started out really healthy is now mutated to something else. I don't think you see it because you're so close to it. Can we have a conversation about it? So I try to be really careful about that. My dad said to me once, he said, keep people in your life, keep a lot of people in your life who aren't on your payroll. So the idea of, if I'm paying you, like, you know some of my story, but also you might not tell me the whole thing, because there's a part of you that can't help but go, I like this job, I like these benefits, I like this. And so, you know, that's not the same as having somebody in your life that can tell you the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I love that idea of kind of an inner circle that isn't on your payroll, and that isn't kind of just a yes person, essentially.
Or motivated by keeping their job. Like, even if they have the best of intentions, it's like, if I've got 7 kids and I'm about to tell you something hard and I go, well, they sure do like to eat and they'd like to go to college, and this isn't that big a deal. And then you start to edit. So yeah, I think there's a danger in that.
Wow. So I'm sure you have friends who have done this thing about having a like personal board of directors. Have you heard of this idea? So I'm very curious about, it sounds like the inner circle is kind of the same thing, right? So you go to people with big decisions.
It's not as deliberate yet. So part of working with the business coach, I did core values. I'm doing key objectives for the next year to 18 months, and then I'm putting together a board. So I'm not that far along in the process. I've identified some people, and now I have to answer questions like, are we meeting quarterly? Like, am I flying them in? Is it, you know, am I giving deliverables? Am I being accountable? For me, it's been hard as an entrepreneur not to have somebody to be accountable to. And you're always accountable in the sense of, you've got clients. I work for Penguin. That's who published Do Over. Like, sure. I want, you know, they're somebody that I'm accountable to. But I'm trying to now figure out, okay, what does a board look like? Are they a paid board? Are they an unpaid board? Like, people do it differently. So yeah, I don't have one right now, but I've learned the value, and I'm in the process of putting one together.
Okay, so let's say, you know, you today, or maybe you in 10 years, let's say you've become kind of a mentor to someone, right? Or you maybe have people in your life like this already, and they wanted to put together a board. What would, and they asked you to be on their board, what would make you do it, essentially? What do you think the motivations are for people to want to do that kind of thing?
Well, I think there are people that love to pour into others. I've got a friend named Hunter who, he's, you know, like me, in his early 40s, and really loves to help guys in their 20s and 30s kind of figure out where they're headed next. I think he has a natural passion for that. I think the older you get, I think that you realize that your definition of success might not be the same as it was. So you might have had some financial goal, and then you get it and you go, oh, like, it didn't change much. It didn't fix anything. And so I think there is joy in helping people. It's really fun to help somebody avoid maybe a hole you fell in, and especially somebody who's willing to learn. I think that would be why I would do it, is, are they coachable? I've had people ask me for advice, and I can tell the second I start talking, they're not going to do any of the advice. So it's just, it wastes my time and it wastes their time. And so I think that'd be a big question for me, is, are they coachable? And the other thing is there something I can actually contribute? Like, when somebody asks me, like, okay, when I do Q&As on Facebook or Periscope, and they go, how do you get an illustrator for your children's book? There's a temptation, as somebody who likes to talk and hear themselves, and the ego and the narcissist, whatever, that you go, I have answers for all subjects. Right. It's much better for me to go, you know what, I've never done a children's book, but there are a lot of people who have. Or like when somebody goes, how do you really do a webinar well? What's the best software? I've done some, but I'm not amazing at it. Where like a guy like Lewis Howes, who sells a course on it, would have a much better answer. Sure. Or when somebody says, how do I get a publisher to notice me? Michael Hyatt has a course about that. And he worked in publishing for 30 years. I'd much rather go, you need to talk to Michael Hyatt. So for me, if somebody said, I want you to mentor me, and I didn't feel like I really had something I could contribute, that'd be a reason I'd say no. It'd also be on the season of life I'm in. Like, would I be able to do it? I endorse a lot less books now, because if I'm not really engaged in the time to takes to really give them a good endorsement, it does them a disservice, and the endorsement feels empty.
Do you think sort of at this, I'm curious about, you at this point in your career, you've, from the outside world, at least we think you're successful, John. Yay. How does that affect your ability to take risk? Like, do you take more risk now that you've had more success, or do you take less risk?
Yeah, I mean, I think you take less. I don't know.
Or what should you be doing, maybe? Or what do you think is a good thing to do if it's not about what you have done, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think I look at it where I count the cost differently. I recognize that once you start speaking at a lot of big brands, you start to realize big brands follow you on Twitter. And so, it wouldn't be smart for me to do some cheap, stupid joke about a brand I don't like, knowing that maybe someday I'd get to speak there and help them, and I don't want to do damage to the potential of that relationship for the sake of a joke that was just like 2 seconds of ether, So I think I am more careful in that sense of going, okay, risk reward. Like the reward of a dumb tweet that people look at for 2 seconds and then disappears is not worth the risk of offending a potential client that I could really go get to know and work with and help. So I guess I'm more careful in that sense. But as far as risk, I try new things. Like trying the 30 Days of Hustle, turning it into a video course was a risk. I hadn't done that before. I was nervous about that. Sometimes people go, "You're so good at not selling people things," and they mean it as a compliment. But I know on my end, it's because I was afraid. So I go, "You're right. I'm a giver. It's generous." Where I know inside it's because I'm afraid to ask somebody to do something where I feel like, okay, I worked really hard on this program. I'm working with a researcher from the University of Memphis right now to really crunch how people change their lives and feel good about going, this is valuable. You should try this. And so that was a risk. So I guess I look at new stuff and go, okay, that was a risk. Speaking at different clients is always a risk because you don't necessarily know what's going to happen, and it's easier to do the things you've always done. Leaving Dave Ramsey was a huge risk. I knew how to do that. And so going off on my own was a risk. Having people go, you wrote this book about having a dream job and now you don't have a job. It's like being an out of shape exercise trainer. That was that was risky. That the last 3 years have been risky in that sense.
And do you, now that you're sort of where you are now and you've kind of achieved what you've achieved, how much do you kind of remember what it was like 15 years ago?
Yeah, I think I'm always trying to do that because I see people that are further along the path than me and they're so disconnected from what it's really like that their examples or their advice rings really hollow. They've been writing, they led a company, 30 or 40 years ago, and they're not in enough companies anymore.
Right.
And so now they're writing ideas about what it's like to be in a company. And every year that idea gets older and more out of touch. And so I think part of it for me is staying connected to real people. One of the reasons I don't price stuff at $10,000, because there's this whole your online course, everybody does a 4-page PDF and it's an ebook. And then they go, it's $9,000. And you go, well, what have you done? Don't ask those questions. I've sold you this ebook. But one of the reasons I try to price things reasonably is I had coffee with a guy at Chick-fil-A that's one of my readers. And he said, my wife and I have $50 of the spendable income every month. And we used it on your Audible book and it meant a lot to us. Wow. And so I remember that Jeremy is a real guy.
Wow.
There comes a point where I want my business to grow. I want it to be awesome. And I love that. And I want to win. I'm very competitive, but I also know I want to keep Jeremy in mind. So I think I do remember talking to 4 people. Yeah, that was honestly oh, I don't need the podium. That's an ego hit in the sense of oh, that's right. But for me, I feel more connected to real people because when I worked at big companies, I couldn't say, hey, small company, here's how you do this. I mean, I did, but now I look back on it and go, what was I saying? I'd never run my own company. 3 years into my own company, when I hear somebody else who's disconnected go, just launch a website with a great logo. I go, oh, there's a logo machine that's just a button, and they're awesome. And now that I run my own company, I realize every action has like 72 sub actions you have to do if you want it to go well. And it's not as easy as people think who haven't done it. And so I think back when I was at big companies telling small companies, just have your PR team do it. Like I would have been sitting in the crowd like, well, that's me too. I'll put that hat on. Or like have your marketing team. So I think I do remember it. I don't remember it in the sense of like, it's hard with Twitter because there's a lot of followers to remember what it was like to have nobody respond, or like to have a blog where nobody read. So I've benefited from that. But as far as trying to build a business and talking to the trenches of being an entrepreneur, like I'm there. Like the business coach is kicking my butt 3 weeks ago and going, you don't know how much it's worth when somebody gets on your email list. So you therefore can't know if paying for Facebook ads makes sense. Yep. You're in the dark. And then I go, wow, like there's 1,000 things in my business I need to fix. And it feels overwhelming. Let me get started on 3. So I still feel like I'm not out of those woods yet, if that makes sense.
I love that. I think that's, I feel empowered and, I don't know. I feel like I learned a lot.
Okay.
And I don't know. Can you just in closing, just tell folks what you're working on now and where people can find you? Yeah.
My latest book is called Do Over. It's available everywhere right now.
And it's sitting behind you on the shelf.
Yeah, it's all I have them all, but there's other ones for sale where you live. I don't mail it out of my house. Like Jenny said, if we ever have to mail stuff out of our garage, we're getting a divorce. Like I will never sell a physical product out of my house because the day we're labeling stuff, like for like $1 a thing, like forget it. Yes. Like that is, I will not make that mistake. So yeah, and then the thing I'm excited about is 30 Days of Hustle. If you go to 30daysofhustle.com, depending on when you watch this, you can either sign up or you can get on the wait list. And we've taken 15,000 people through it, and they've lost weight and decluttered, and it's a 30-day video course that's similar to all the words I said today. So I'm excited about that. And then Twitter, you can find me at John Acuff, JONACUFF. Then my website's acuff.me.
Thank you, John. This is so great. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks, Claire.